Hello, this is Lights Camera Media, and today we will be discussing the music ontology of rock and roll by Little Richie, Gracyk's Rhythm and Noise and Aesthetics of Rock, and T-Pain in the Netflix show This Is Pop. I'm Michael.
I'm Ava.
I'm Aisha.
I'm Peter. So for this week, we had to watch two documentaries. The first film was about a gay and black musician who went by the name Little Richard and it was about how his music and identity changed over the course of his career, along with how his music helped shape the industry's view of rock and roll. Then we had to watch an episode of This Is Pop, which featured T-Pain. In this episode, he spoke mostly about autotune and how the feedback from it, how people responded to it, both hurt and helped him.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the Little Richard documentary and kind of his evolution, Little Richard's kind of evolution through music. He started as a church singer and eventually started working at a gay club and embraced that and started producing music that has not even necessarily subtext. It's pretty much entire text of like gay sex being the point of the music or the subject of the music, and how that kind of evolved. And instead of that being embraced, white men like Elvis, and I can't remember that other guy's name, but he really sucked at singing, that guy who replayed and remade his music throughout the time. And towards the end of his life, he got kind of fed up with the idea of like, no, this was me who created it. And you're giving credit to other people. I'm still here. Why is no one focusing on me? There's also the subtext of his religious journey over the course of the film. If anyone kind of has any other points they want to add to that, yeah, that's kind of what I got from the film and the evolution of Little Richard.
I mean, one of my notes from that is I wrote down that his like persona, like the way he carried himself and stuff like that, it like kind of it kind of like suggested that the like rock's ontology, like the music ontology of rock, is like tied to like the live performance aspect of it and like rebellion and identity, like construction and stuff like that. That's what I
Yeah, of
got.
like of rock and roll bands, I think.
Yeah.
A lot of it's very performance. I think they're called like hair. I don't know. I've heard them being like Kiss and all that. I've heard them being referred to as like hair metal
Hair
bands
metal.
or like
Yeah, hair metal.
yeah, hair
But
metal.
I think that's different than
But
rock
is
and
that
roll.
different?
It's
Yeah.
very different from rock and roll. I always feel like when you go into the genres of any music app, I always get confused by rock and roll because in my head, rock and roll is one thing, but it's like Elvis Presley and Little Richard, which are two things that I don't think are rock and roll. Like that doesn't, when I think of rock and roll, I think more metal and hair metal
Mm,
than,
But yeah.
I guess so. I think just because like it's been like drilled into us that Elvis and Little Richard is rock and roll. I like know it, but yeah, I couldn't really necessarily put them like side by side next to like Kiss
yeah,
or
because
anything.
Yeah.
I don't think, I think that's rock music, not rock and roll, because rock and
Mm,
roll has like a smoother sound to me, if that makes sense. It feels somehow like
jazzier.
jazzier, softer. I mean, it probably helps that it was created by Black musicians, they're
Yeah.
not credited for, but a lot of the stuff that you would associate with jazz or R&B comes out in rock and roll music, especially towards the beginning. And obviously, they're evolutions of the same medium. So they're all going to have like similar pull from each other moments. But yeah.
Like I know like Little Richard's like music, like he not only like defied and like strayed from like racial norms, but also like gender and sexual norms. Like he like did all three of those, whereas like Kiss, I don't think does that from what I know.
Mm,
I feel like he certainly opened the doors for other artists who could just be more of themselves, like David Bowie, because he was mentioned in the film quite a few times. And Freddie Mercury, because Freddie Mercury is probably one of the
Mhm.
most famous ones, at least for people our generation, who's just flamboyant on stage. And from what it seems is that Little Richard was one of the first ones, if not the first one, to really do that.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think there's also a fashion evolution within Little Richard. Especially when they talk about the disco ball outfit, the outfit in the film. They talk about like this outfit that is covered with mirrors and he dances around and he's like a mirror ball. And I feel like David Bowie and I think another one that we haven't mentioned is Elton John have that same
Oh
Oh,
yeah.
costume flair within their music where they, or even if we want to go more current, Chapel Roan, who comes
Chuck.
out in a drag persona.
Oh, Greta Van Fleet. Do you guys
Yeah.
know that? Yeah, that's
There's a lot of
literally
artists.
a rock band.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think
who's
there's a lot
very.
of, yeah, I think there's a lot of artists who pull from that. Billy Porter also was in it, but these people who are able to portray themselves the way they want to be portrayed or hide parts of themselves they don't want to be seen through their costuming,
Mm,
coming from Little Richard. I also think, did I imagine that he had a wife? Did I
No,
make that up in my head? He had a wife, right?
get a beard.
He had a beard.
Little
And I feel
Richard?
like even that, like, you see other musicians who did that.
Mm.
Like, David Bowie had one. Like, there's like other musicians, although his wife, David Bowie and his wife are very cute together. And I do think they genuinely loved each other. She still refers to David Bowie as my husband, even though he's been dead for a couple years, which I think is very wholesome. Um, but even musicians like that who have parts of themselves hidden through their public persona, even though eventually it comes out, I feel like that's very music and the industry has that continuously. And Little Richard might not have been the first, but he is in this documentary the most prominent example of it. So it's not just the music that he is helping the evolution of, but also the communities that he is a part of. I think Little Richard has even like looking at him next to Elvis and other Black musicians that came right before him, he's so different from them, even though, like I said, Elvis kind of just recreated his music.
There's just for a brief second, when they were talking about the Beatles in the section with the Beatles, there
Mm.
was this there's a shot from one of the live performances, and in the crowd there was somebody holding up a sign that said Elvis is dead, long live the Beatles. And it's not really relevant, but I do find that interesting.
I think it's, I mean, I think that's also interesting. And it has spurred a different moment in my head of teenagers. They kind of bring this up
Mm-mm.
in the music of like the teenagers, you get, even if you're a really big musician, you get to a certain point where teenagers just want a new musician to take over. They're, you can even see it in like more modern aspects. I
Yeah.
mean, I can't think of any good examples, but I feel like there's the new pop girls, like Chapel Rowan, Sabrina Carpenter. Like there's like these artists who have been around for a while but are just now getting big and have become like the 2020s pop girls. Gracie Abrams is another example of these people. You get to a certain point and then the teenagers who once supported you have now outgrown the rebel phase. So you're their rebel phase. I had another teacher who I took a class with who kind of described it as like there was the teenagers when jazz was big and
Mm.
their rebellion was jazz. And then their kids, their rebellion was rock and roll. So the teenagers who were with jazz never understood rock and roll and stuff like that. Like the music is always evolving and it's always to fit the needs of the teenagers at the time.
Yeah. I really, when I think of like, I think also part of the, for me at least, the like ontology of rock and roll is definitely like teen girliness.
Yeah.
Like, what are they, like poodle skirts and like a little headband.
Yeah.
Like that's what I picture, like, Elvis on a stage and then like just a whole bunch of like girls like fawning over him
Yeah.
and stuff.
But I can't, at the same time, I can't imagine people doing that with Little Richard. Like that is
Oh,
a
well,
completely
yeah.
different demographic that you're looking at. That is because they also mentioned that there's the black radio stations that the white teens are listening to, but the black radio stations are not made for the white teenagers. They're made for the black teenagers.
Hmm.
I was gonna talk about like the performance
Yeah, go
of
for it.
it, like the music, like the ontology, like the rock and roll ontology of like the act of the performance itself, where like this the sound and like the persona that Little Richard like puts together, it merges into like one singular like artistic reality in a sense. I feel like so like they really like even like with Elvis like his performances like you can remember it like his performances and then you can also remember the sound and it's like I don't know I think during that era it
Yeah.
was really heavy on performances and stuff like that.
I think there's also the moment at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in that moment when he said, "Why is no one recording me?"
Hmm.
Like this, it wasn't even about him in the moment. It was about Otis, I think. But he's like, "No, I spawned what Otis became. Like this isn't about him. It's also about me and how I created this genre." And he is very much an egotist in this moment. And he says, "I'm not conceited. I'm convinced."
I remember from what like really stuck with me was kind of the for the ontology of rock, not like rock and roll, was the whole idea of like the recording studios and the like physical act and what they came up with and all like the unique like I guess instruments and in like musical tools that they would kind of find within that studio to like make the record. You know, it all had to be like recorded live and all that stuff. And that really, I don't know. I think when I think of like Beatles rock, I think of them in like a studio, like sitting around a mic with like some like wacky little like tools to create like the perfect like I don't know mimic of like some random bird.
I
Clearly,
feel
I'm
like
like
what
trying to
you're
reference
imagining
songs.
is Folly, or is it Foley? Foley? It's whatever, like when you're watching a movie and the sound effects that are
Oh,
made.
Foley,
Foley,
yeah,
it's you're what
Foley,
you're
Foley
picturing is actually
mentioned,
Foley.
Foley mentioned. But no, that's like in you know, remember that Disney like
Yeah,
Beatles like thing? Yeah, the like the main like trailer is like them in the thing, and then them in the recording studio, and then that clip that Manon showed in class of who was it?
Rolling Stones.
Rolling Stones doing something. The Devil, Here Comes the Devil. I don't know. I don't know what the song was called.
Like I read this and I saw that like Gracyk his name is Theodore Gracyk, right? I think so
Mm.
anyway. But he he's like arguing a point where performance is now shifting into like a recording, I guess, like just well, yeah,
Yeah.
performance shifts to recording. And I feel like he argues that like rock is like an art of like studio production in a sense, I guess.
Yeah.
Where like the primary like musical work is not a live performance, but it's like a recorded object.
yeah,
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
He
yeah.
seems to think that the biggest distinction between rock and roll is that rock is a lot more about the recording element, where rock and roll is the live element of it.
yeah. I think that makes sense. I think also even when rock musicians go on tour and are performing live, they always change something about how they perform. I think that's true of any performer, that there's always going to be slight changes versus the recording versus live. I think the most egregious one that I can think of is the Arctic Monkeys. Have any of you seen the video of him singing it's one of their famous songs, and he does not singing it on tempo, so no one can
Oh,
sing along with him.
yeah.
And you're like, come on,
Yeah.
that's not
I
the
mean, that's
point of
kind of
going to
the
a live show.
that's the fun of live shows,
Yeah.
like being able to see how like the artist like is gonna play with the song and stuff. Yeah.
There was also that one live live performance. I don't remember who it was, but but the
I
lead
thought you
singer,
meant
she
like in a
was
conspiracy way.
yeah, no, but she was eating the banana because the people who were hosting it wouldn't let her do the
Oh
live
yeah, yeah,
singing.
Are
yeah,
you
yeah.
serious?
Is that
Hmm? No,
that's
this
people
was
sing
like
California Dreaming.
it
That's
was that one. Yeah.
it's the Mamas
Oh,
and
older.
Papas.
But it was a performance of
Yeah, it's in
California
the
Dreaming
60s. Yeah, it's
and the people
I think
hosting
they're
the
called the
recording.
Mamas and Papas. Yeah,
Yeah.
the Mamas and the Papas.
The
Yeah, I
people
remember.
hosting the recording wouldn't let them actually sing it live. So she just ate a banana while mouthing along just as a sort of rebellion.
Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, I think even now, and I'm so sorry to keep bringing her up, but she's just so prevalent in my mind right now. Sabrina Carpenter, when she was called out for using a backing track, which I think is a perfectly reasonable thing for an artist to do, where it's like not them singing the entire song, but sometimes like key moments there will be backing music.
Doesn't every artist do that? Like
Every
as
artist does it, but she got called out for using too much of a backing track. She
um,
took the backing track out to prove that she was live singing. And
Wasn't
like,
there
I don't
an
think an artist should need to do that. You're there for, as we refer to it, aura points in our first video. We did. We used aura points in our first video. Like, just enjoy the show. Like,
Yeah,
what?
you go to a live performance to hear to hear a live rendition of it. You don't go to a live performance to hear a recorded production of it.
Yeah, but
yeah.
it's not going to sound,
No, but
but
I
the
don't mean like
expectation of artists is so high. They need help.
no,
Not
but
that.
I'm on your side. I'm not
Oh,
arguing
okay.
with you. I
Sorry,
absolutely
the way
agree
you
that
worded it.
that backing tracks is important for a lot of things because there's a lot of things that maybe artists can't do or they do need the assistance. But saying that but the idea of using the full track and just
Yeah,
not sing along
yeah,
at
that's
or
not.
no live performance of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. To go back to like Ava's like earlier point, I was gonna say like rock music, like like he kind of suggests that it gains meaning through like technological like mediation, like that type of stuff. Whereas like there's like distortion, there's like multi-tracking, there's like post-production elements a part of it. And like it it's like a shift where it's no longer about like the liveness of it, but it's like about the recording aspects of it. It's about like the sound like construction, basically.
But we were talking about the live performance and how that's just it's
Mhm.
not the
Yeah.
same as, a a recorded performance, but it has its own specialness, which as that Theodore Gracyk seems to think that rock, it doesn't really it kind of loses its meaning when you go to a live performance because he says that there are even those who believe that since each performance is at its best only an imperfect and approximate representation of the work itself, it follows that music's inner meanings can never be properly yielded up in performance. So I'm not sure if he believes that, but or if he just believes that other people believe that. But the idea, I mean, I think to an extent he that is right that there's a specific meaning that, if you consider music to be an art, that the artist puts, a lot of creativity into the track that they're making, and because it can't be perfectly replicated in live performance, it is going to lose part of the, performance element of it. I
Mm.
Yeah.
think that's what he's trying to say there.
Yeah. I would agree with that analysis of that moment in that paper. I think there's also in that argument a point being made about it can, while it is generated to be a recording, can it be performed better live? Like, is the experience somehow of being in the space with the artist better?
I
Or is
think
that
that it's less about the experience of it because I think that there are some songs that to a listener's ear is going to be better live for some instances. I think that in a lot of cases, especially, it's not less about the song, but it's also about the people coming together. Because the first thing that comes to mind is Coldplay and Viva La Vida and how that's probably one of their most famous songs, but everybody just gets together for that song. Or no, no, Queen, because a lot of people get together for their stuff, you
Yeah.
know? But just because it has a great impact on you personally. doesn't mean that that is going to be exactly the impact that the artist wanted it to be.
Yeah.
Well, kind of back to like the performance thing. I think Gracyk in the article, I guess he does kind of follow what you're saying. He kind of like critiques the idea that like rock is so heavily focused on recording in the use of like acoustic instruments. I'm just thinking back to my mom because she always talks about how like the music now is so automated, which like, I agree. It does like kind of hurt my ears when I listen too much of like a fake guitar. Gracyk wrote this in Rhythm and Noise in 1996, so like kind of like the idea of using auto tune as much as T-Pain is still cause wasn't really a thing. But even then he was saying like the idea that all like music has to be acoustic and like recorded in the studio like rock was with like all these found instruments. He's even saying that it's outdated. Now I feel like it's kind of circling back to like people wanting to use more authentic things. But anyways, I don't know. My key point for this kind of section, I think
I have
Yeah.
a point that I don't know is relevant, but I this discussion has made me think of it.
mm,
Have you guys seen the film A Knight's Tale? Heath Ledger's in it. Uh, okay. Basically, Heath Ledger is a knight in the film, and it's a very historically accurate, like the costumes, how jousting worked, like all of that's very accurate. But instead of having like medieval music playing at any point, it's like Queen, like people stomping to Queen. And the I can't remember if it's the director who said it, but they had this idea of like they didn't want to have that type of music because they wanted the film to feel the way that a joust would feel and the way that people would associate that with the feeling of like this is like a big event. This is like it turned into a concert for them. Like they turned it into a concert, even though everything else is very historically accurate. Queen is playing, other songs like that are playing of like this rock. And I don't even think it's relevant to this argument, but I think there's this element of like rock being this thing that brings people together and this thing that creates energy being a through line for that, as well as just how music and the industry works of like bringing people together, even if it is just a recording, like people will play recordings at clubs or stuff like that, where even if it is recorded with the intent of being a recording, it still brings people together in the way that rock and roll originally brought people together in performances.
yeah, I agree with it completely. Like this era of 2000s, this kind of like genre of 2000s music is literally for the club. Like it's the everything about it is about the club, like music videos, the lyrics. It's made to make you like dance dance up on somebody and like feel the liquor and all that. I agree with that.
Yeah.
With your
So
statement.
so
But
like if I understood like this correctly, like rock's ontology is like according to like Gracyk is basically about like recorded fidelity, and the 2000s like is about like redefined authenticity through like manipulation of the sound, which
yeah,
is autotune.
yeah, and I think the them using like auto tune and all these type of technological like instruments. It was really controversial at the time. I think it honestly I think it still like is, but clearly we've moved so far into like tech technologically made music.
I mean, one of the things that T-Pain says in the show, I don't remember exactly what it was word for word, but he said that the first person to try something new always gets the backlash from it, which is why when he was talking about Kanye West, he said that they were talking, Kanye West was like, he knew that it was going to work because T-Pain had already tried it and
Yeah.
opened the door for him. Whereas, T-Pain didn't have that. So he also mentioned it's like, oh, but these two other people did it. Cher was one of them, I believe. And but he's like, I don't get why I get all the hatred when she did it
Oh,
first. But it's like he did it most, which is what somebody argued that that's why he was the one primarily affected by it.
I even think that kind
Yeah.
of goes back to Little Richard in a lot of ways of like the person who does it first is the one who gets the most backlash for doing it first. So like of course the other people got more popular because they followed in his footsteps as opposed to being the person who creates. I
It's
don't know if
crazy.
you're on the same side of TikTok as me. The McDonald's and the Pentagon song.
I think that one of the things about rock is how that it was completely, about the recording. And now, a few years ago, I was big into electronic music, and in the documentary, they talked about how electronic music also got its start during that time of late rock. But I think one of the whole things now is the fact that you can, in fact, go to a show and hear the recording of it, but yet you still believe it to be a both a record, it's a recording, but it's also somehow still a live performance as well,
So,
which I think is
oh, the
Yeah.
electronic.
interesting.
I
Yeah.
mean, I guess even the ABBA shows where they're holograms. Like they're I think they did it with Prince and Tupac as well, but Tupac was like, don't do that. Like, don't bring Tupac into this. They were like, stay away from him. But like there's holograms and they perform, but they're holograms, but you're still whatever. I think music is taking a turn right now to like a more genuine music, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. Or like I mean, I guess the people that I'm thinking of are like again Chapel Roan and stuff like that, like where like that's a more authentic musician. Even if she's performing in drag, she's telling a story that is so genuine, and a lot of people are still too scared to tell of like her journey of like learning about herself. I mean, even I didn't listen to a lot of her music, and I feel bad about it because I do think she's a really good rapper. Doechii, who won Rapper of the Year, of
Did I doge?
Yeah.
like even her telling like a more genuine like she is from where she is, this is she's not going to filter herself for somebody else, like it's a more
Yeah.
genuine story being told throughout her music. Tyler the Creator's new album I think also has like kind of that vibe of like a more genuine story being told as opposed to,
Yeah.
especially if you like look at Justin Bieber's early stuff, like not to say that it's bad music, it's objectively bad music. It is like,
Hey.
which is just Bo
Hey.
Burnham has a song called I can't remember the name of the song, but it's I think it's repeat stuff where it's like
Repeat
every song
stuff.
follows this exact formula because it can be generalized to any single person. Like that is kind of what music was for a very long time. And these artists are breaking away from that and being like, no, this is
Yeah.
my story that I want to tell. And I think that's a very going back to Little Richard, like that feels very authentic to themselves, even though he had to edit his lyrics to be more seen as appropriate for the masses.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think that a big part of I agree what you're saying, but I think a big part of that is mostly because of something that happened 6 years ago, which is TikTok. And I think that TikTok
Mhm.
and the rise of a lot of short form social media has made it a lot easier for indie artists, small artists to, get bigger because for a while the problem was that unless you were basically born into fame, it was hard to get your music out there. Some of the best music we've ever probably heard came out 30 years ago, but we're never going to hear it because it was some kid in their dad's basement but couldn't get a record deal. But now because of social media and stuff, you don't need record deals to get big, you just need to get viral, which if
Yeah.
you do this stuff for long enough, it is going to happen.
Yeah. And we mentioned Dochi, and she in her in Denial is a River, she literally talks about how like there was a point not 6 years ago, but like 4 years ago where she was making TikTok songs and she was really frustrated with that. And now comes like this
Yeah.
new album that she released, which is very genuine. And I also like feel like music is, I mean, maybe I don't know, maybe it's because of like my algorithm, so this is what I'm seeing, but I feel like music is becoming a lot more like diverse and very like female centered, which I'm loving because you know all of the artists that we just mentioned like for this entire segment have been all like men, men of color, but men, and like gay men, but men taking like the lead and things. So I don't know, hopefully that'll send like a new kind
Yeah.
of ontology to music
To
for the next couple.
to give it like a timeline, basically from what I see it as is music shifted from like physical, which is like performance, to like then material, which is like recording, and then like the digital aspect, which is autotune, to now, which is like is starting to shift, but not really, into like non-human, which is like AI. Because I or
Okay.
like a lot of AI music has come out in like last year, and it's like very like you have to listen to it on high volume to differentiate like the people. It's really crazy.
I think that we haven't been giving the artists that were women at Little Richard's time enough credit. I mean, they
Mm.
mention like a lot of Black women because they really were the first people that were recorded because of course men were
Both.
recorded as well, but yeah, a lot of Elvis's work is not his own and is from Black creators, Black women and Black men alike. But it's even like outside of just music, looking at film and stuff like that, like those were all women because the women were the editors. Like
Mm.
a lot
Yeah.
of like I think that's like the big issue of like a lot of these looking at media from the beginning is the women will always be overlooked within it. Um, Arguably, women editors were directors because they were making the final decisions of like what went where. And I think that's even true to the point of music, where it's women who are sometimes in control of like what is being produced, where it's being produced. Not necessarily themselves, but through the men around them and how they influence the men around them. If that makes sense. It probably does. But because Little Richard mentions that like he did a lot of it for his mother. Like even though he was a man and he was making the music, it was to help his mom or it was for his mom.
He was
Um,
both very humble and egotistical at the same time, somehow.
yeah,
I think he knew who he was.
yeah,
He's Little Richard. Like I think he knew exactly
yeah,
what he had to offer. And people didn't really have like I mean, yeah, they had a reason to like bring him down, but it wasn't like, justified or anything. Like I think he just knew.
yeah. Uh, Thank you for watching this week's video of Lights Camera Media and our discussion on the films. We will see you next week to discuss whatever we have to discuss next week. We will see.